Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are watching on YouTube, you'll see a little link down below. You can click on that and actually join the conversation here in Zoom. If you're an attendee and you're watching all of us talking and thinking that you might know a couple things that we don't, you might. And we'd love to have you join the panel. So all you got to do is get here early. We open the doors at 6. Between 6 and 6:40, we're just chit-chatting, having coffee, having tea, and talking about whatever comes up. But at 6:40, we start to get more serious. And we do mic checks. We put out a Discord link. That's where you can actually talk to everyone here over text between all the shows. Then we do mic checks. Mic checks are making sure that we have good audio, good video, good internet, and ready for the panel. So if you're here by 6:40, you can join the panel. All you got to do is raise your digital hand. From 7 to 8, we have a open forum. We whatever you have questions about around media production, we will. I would like to say we have answers, but I can't promise that. We have the ability to discuss them. so we'll discuss them for a while, and hopefully it'll enlighten you, or at least give you a couple places to look next. So that's from 7 to 8. 8 to 9, we have a more vertical specific conversation. So Mondays are kind of wild cards. Tuesdays are audio. Wednesdays are camera and video. Thursdays are special guests. And Friday, we talk about events and production and kind of working in this process. And then on Saturdays, we talk about education. Sundays, we just kind of keep talking. To give you a sense of it today, we're talking about video scopes. So we're going to return to video scopes as a discussion. And then tomorrow we have Madeline Smithberg. This is an Emmy Award-winning producer and creator of the Comedy Central show, The Daily Show. So Madeline's going to Sky talk to Madeline, and Madeline's going to come by and chat with us tomorrow. We're very excited. Friday we're going to talk about getting hired. We talked a little bit about getting work as producers on Monday. Today on Friday we're going to talk about how you get the first jobs, not as a producer, but as an artist or as an artisan. So we're going to talk about that on Friday, and then Saturday, of course, general education. So that's what we got coming up this week. And if you want to share this, you can. Just don't use your own link. You want to use the link that we just put into the Mukana. That is the link you want to use there. If you use your own, people will all show up as you. We don't want that. We like having just one of each person. It really is the best way to go. Bill, can we well, first of all, before we jump into the questions, and I don't know, maybe there is a question about this, but yeah, we'll wait. There's some questions that are related to it, so we'll wait. I was going to talk about the Apple thing, but a bunch of us sat around and talked. I think before we won't talk about the specifics, but I thought that yesterday's little process worked pretty well. So what we did, for those of you who weren't able to make it, we didn't stream it. We're not going to stream those kinds of things. We all jumped into Zoom. There was probably 9 or 10 of us that jumped into Zoom, watched the Apple event, and just talked about it. But we didn't put it into the stream. We just put it as a separate thing that we were all watching on our own screen. But it's kind of a second ear experience for us, so that if you wanted to listen to us talking while you're watching something on your Apple TV or on your phone, you could do that. And I thought that the response from at least the poll was very good. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I tuned in as just an attendee, and I liked your format a lot better than the one Laporte does on his channel, because at least in this one, if you suddenly want to hear what Apple is talking about, and you guys are all kibitzing, you can kind of balance your audio down a little bit and listen to the meat of the announcement and bring it back up. Because half the time on other streaming shows that do the Mystery Science Theater stuff, the comments overlap the meat of the announcement. You miss stuff. So I really liked
our comments definitely overlapped, and I think we talked the whole time. Like there was like this constant droning on, because the big thing that we did that's a little different than most people do, we weren't just talking about the announcements, we were talking about the production. So we're sitting there talking about the cameras and the pieces and everything else. And so yeah, you definitely had kind of a steady, you had to decide what you were going to listen to there. But yeah, I have been a proponent for that for a long time, and I have had trouble getting people to take it on. So I figured, well, I'll take it on, and we'll see if we like it. I think that format, there's a couple things about that format. One is that it is legal. No, not legal, but it doesn't break copyright. So one of the as you start to grab, if you want to stream it to a larger audience, taking somebody else's stream and pumping it out, whether it's Apple or the NFL or anything else. People don't like that. And this and it also gives the, as to your point, it gives the listener control over whether they're listening to you or not. Go ahead, Courtney.
Well, if you live in LA, Harry Shearer and Michael McKean and a bunch of the guys called the Credibility Gap used to do this every year at the Rose Parade.
Oh, yeah.
And they would have a radio show that you'd tune in, and then you'd put Channel 5, because you knew they were watching Channel 5 on your TV, and they'd comment about and do wisecracks and comments about each float that came by, and it made for a great communal listening experience.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that second year experience, I actually thought about it a lot, because a lot of us, when I grew up in Pittsburgh, we like to listen to a guy named Myron Cope, and he just had a lot of personality. You know, he's the one that created the Terrible Towel, and he so we all wanted to listen to him, but so we would always tune in the Steeler games, and then we'd turn off the TV, or turn off the TV's audio and listen to Myron Cope, which was very odd because the calls were different times, you know, and everything else. But it was fun to have, and so I really, you know, have been thinking about it. We've done some second year experience stuff before, but never, I don't know, never in the right format. And I felt like yesterday worked pretty well. So I think we'll do more of those. We'll find. I mean, we would probably do it with, if I wasn't so busy, we'd probably do it with Zoomtopia today. But we'll find some other announcements that we're interested in, and kind of do that Mystery Science Theater thing. I think it's a valid model, you know, for the process. So we'll keep on playing with it. Go ahead, Bill. Let's go to the first question.
Okay, from A. Mitchell's in Washington. Here's what he says. So given that for many mobile devices, yesterday's Apple Theater just didn't work due to unavoidable conflicts of resources for the device. So having Chat, Apple Event, and Zoom fairly mutually exclusive. How do we make an event program like this work for those on mobile devices? And his note is, so a device could show or hear only one component at a time, which blocks the other two, and switching to the other turns off the audio from the first. This is not all devices, just most.
I don't know if there's a mobile only way to do that, other than having, if you really produced that event, you could put out separate streams and have people be able to jump from audio stream to audio stream. I mean, that would be definitely possible if you wanted to give people more. We've talked a lot about that, of having like behind the scenes. One of the things we noticed about before the show that people really like is listening to the production talk. And we thought it'd be really fun to have them listen to the production talk the whole time, but it's always dangerous because folks in production are not always public facing.
But I subscribe to a Clearcom channel in a second.
Yeah, the Clearcom channel. I mean, when you're in production, the secret is the best show in the house is the Clearcom channel, of the listening to all the calls and everything else. And we had one show that we did that the client let us basically stage it so that it looked in the live stream like it was it was all rehearsed, and some of it was recorded. But we had, so for the 10 minutes before the show, we made it seem like we had accidentally turned the camera on. And so you saw this wide shot and people are walking in and you could hear all, but as event people, we made it very accurate. You know, you hear all the, okay, we're going to do this, and you hear this like chatter. We even had a person walk out on stage and go, hey, we're like 3 minutes away. Get that guy off the stage. So someone runs over and pushes him off. So we tied it all in as a little, you know, there was little bits of rehearsal and everything else. People went crazy. Like, I was like, I can't believe we can't, but everyone's too scared to do it again. Like it took, and admittedly, it took us a couple days to rehearse it and plan it and build it out for, you know, but it was so much fun as a pre-show. And I always feel like if anyone could ever hear that, I've been in trucks and backstage since the early 90s. And so I've been listening to this chatter, and it's so much better than the show most of the time. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I've spent most of my life in the backside of trucks or in the front side of trucks, and we have recorded it a couple of times, and it got pretty insane as far as the language went. But everybody that had watched it, they're going, you guys you're really enjoying what you're doing. I mean, that was the other side of what we got. And yeah, we really like doing that type of tape.
Yeah, it's a good tape. It just, yeah, it is a bunch of sailors in there yelling and screaming. And I was always amazed when I first got to Prime Sports Network and I was in a truck doing like the Denver Nuggets or whatever, the vitriol that would be thrown at the camera operators was intense. And then we would, from the director of just how they're ruining his show and and it's constant yelling of, you just got to get there and everything else. And they get to the end, they go, "Hey guys, great work. That was a really good show. Let's go have a beer." And you were just like, it felt like a Warner, like one of the morning, like little cartoons at the beginning with the sheepdog and the wolf, just because they were like totally fine at the end. But it was in that moment, they were very upset. And go ahead, Doug, and then Courtney.
Yeah, I like to I have a little GoPro and I record in the truck.
Yeah.
And it is very, very funny, especially when your wife, who's your partner, is running replay.
Yeah.
And the wheels are coming off. And then she asks you a question like, "Honey, I got a couple things going on." Yeah. And then she turns to you and says, "Well, you're not going to get any replays right now."
Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I used to work at a educational channel, and they would raise money every year. They'd have like a 12-hour auction live,
right?
And they'd present people, and it was a mess for the same production crew worked the whole 12 hours straight,
right?
Yeah. And since it was an educational channel, there were no breaks, no commercials to cut to. And by the end of the 7th or 8th hour, the chatter on the comms was unbelievably hilarious. And one year I recorded it, became the most popular recording ever at that channel.
Yeah. Go ahead, Grant.
I was just going to get back to the question there.
Grant's pulling us back in. I was thinking about that at the end. I was just going to go, well, I don't know if we really answered the question, but
what was the question?
Fun conversation. Yeah.
So I was just thinking, because we do a similar thing with Zoom when we have a green room and we're piping in the program, and we've really started to just move away from it and just encourage our participants to have their own second device tuned into the program. And then they've got a volume control they can grab onto easily, and they can manage that themselves. And so I think the expectation is that you'll have a second device. It's a much easier way to do it rather than trying to do it on one device, let alone a mobile device.
Yeah, if you look at the event that we're doing in the end of the month, where we have it, Apple TV is, we're expecting you to watch something on a device and then use your phone to interact. It's just build it up as a separate piece. Next question.
John M. Gerard from Berkeley says, what do you think of the new ProRAW format that the iPhone 12 Pro Max announced with?
I think it's interesting. I think it'll be interesting to see, it's exciting that Dolby Vision is being, that the camera is shooting with it. One of the things that becomes complicated, they talked about scene by scene control. One of the things that's complicated there is maintaining the metadata. So the way that Vision works, is that kind of the way to think about it is that you have HLG is kind of we don't want to think about HDR. We just want to say we have HDR. So HLG is kind of it just lives in the same space all the time. It's kind of gruel of it, just slightly better than SDR in my opinion. And then HDR10 basically sets high points, low points, and gamma and all these other bits and pieces for the entire project. So for this next 2 hours, we know that these are the high points and the low points, and this is the midpoints and everything else. Vision does that at every frame. So it just makes a decision about what that is, and it communicates all of that. And there's a ton of metadata there. So when they're talking about scene by scene or frame by frame in the show, that's what Vision does. Is it customizes it it does what HDR10 is doing, but better, and it's got more dynamic range than what HDR10 hits, which is usually HDR10 is at the standard is 1,000 nits, and then Vision tends to go to 4,000 nits. And anyway, so the question is, how do you manage all that metadata? So how do you take that metadata that is defining, all that stuff in between on a frame by frame basis? What we think Apple's going to do in this process is to burn it in, so it'll keep it on the phone or in that format, but we're not sure that that it can't really carry it down the line. One thing that is interesting is, they said you could edit it on your own phone. On the Apple website, it does say, or iMovie or later this year, Final Cut Pro. So it does look like these formats are going to get, support, or Vision is going to get supported in its own way. I don't think this is a replacement for the actual Dolby Vision editing tools and everything else that show up in Resolve or other things. But I think it is going to give a consumer a lot more dynamic range to work with, and it puts an enormous amount of pressure on people who are producing content to go to here's the problem and why it's now very important that we all pay attention to HDR in general and probably vision specifically, and why we're going to talk a lot more about it here, is the gauntlet has been dropped. Everyone now is going to be shooting and watching content in high dynamic range. Like they're not, now everybody's doing that. If you're not producing in HDR, you're going to really, for the average consumer buying one of these iPhones, your content's going to start looking like mud. So that's the, like that, because when you get used to, I'm working in HDR all the time. Every day I'm looking in HDR test footage and final footage and everything else. You get used to it, and I go back to a monitor or something without it, and it just looks like mud, all the time. Like, and so that's going to be the real challenge, and it's probably important for us to really start to really understand HDR. I think a lot of indies don't think about it that much. I think that a lot of people are, but it's not as scary as it sounds, but I think that we're gonna have to pay more attention to it because, for Zoom and stuff, it'll be fine. But I think overall we're gonna have we're gonna expect a lot more as our eyes get used to it. It won't happen immediately. It's just as you start looking at more and more of your own footage on your phone, that's 12,000 nits or 1,200 nits, not 12,000. 10,000 is the max. But at 1,200 nits, you're going to look at stuff that isn't in that format as less than, and it's not going to be something that a lot of people notice. It's just something that they'll feel. Go ahead, Kev.
Just a question. Has it increased your workflow using this extra information now? Has it slowed down the process of cutting all of that? Has that been caught up to accommodate that? We're
catching up. I think it doesn't save time, but it's a much better product, and we're getting to a point where it's the same amount of time. So it's not there yet. I mean, and that's more of a learning process on our end. I mean, and by the end of the year, I think that working in, there's more technical pieces of it, because, I'm working in both, with surround audio as well as HDR. And so those both have their own challenges, as you start to work through that. And so it's just realigning, what you're looking for. And then you have to have a monitor that you can see it on, and so it becomes a more technical. It's definitely a more technical game than just basic. This is how it looks, So that's the new challenge. But it's but as you get into it, you don't want to go back. Like that's the whole thing. Is it and there's definitely a learning curve, but and I hope to help flatten some of that learning curve for this group, as we go into the next couple of months. Yeah, go ahead, Bill.
I just think, once again, I feel the same way I did 3 or 4 years ago when I had to switch from regular video production to video over IP, and we got into NAB, and we had to set up systems that were not baseband video. They were all over computer connections. This feels like a similar kind of transition to me, where you just know this is going to be the future. And if you don't start playing now, you're going to get drifting behind, because it touches so many aspects of the production pipeline. And this is just the accelerating pace of change in our industry. It's moving fast. You're muted, Alex.
Sky, sorry, I was muted. I was looking at Sky. You're good.
Bill's comment, accelerated change of pace. Again, I compare to when we used to have to go through the cycles that Sony and or Panasonic would force us into, because it was to their benefit to sell more tapes. And so we were locked into an $80,000 box, but then the razor blade concept. So I'm just curious, now that we're locked into the CPU, is it the attitude of the consumer that's is the harder thing to change? The technology is available, but getting people's mindsets to...
It's just people seeing it. And the thing is, now they're going to see it all the time. They now have a phone that's going to show it to them all the time. That's, the hardest part is that as soon as you, like for me, when I was sitting in a big theater, and there's 170 speakers, and I talked about this before, they did a surround sound mix of a song, and I was like, okay, that's all I want to hear. Like, but until you heard it, you didn't think about it. A stereo was fine, and then it was ruined forever. And so that's the, it's just a matter of hearing it. Now the problem is consumers are going to see it and hear it. So the cat's kind of out of a bag now. That's the issue now. And I think our resting space, as I said before, is probably 8K, 120 frame per second, 4,000 or 10,000 nit. That's where we're going to get to in the next decade. is high frame rate, high dynamic range, high resolution. But I don't, it's not going to happen tomorrow. It'll take another decade to get there, but that's what we're going to get. That's what we're going to be used to at some point in the next decade.
It's going to be a hollow room. I think we're still going to get to the hologram thing.
The Velt. Go ahead, Grant, and then Bill, and then we'll move on.
Mentioning a high frame rate, do you think it was interesting that they didn't do 120 frames on the iPhone? You think they're doubling down on high dynamic range and not high frame rate?
Yeah, I think people would notice high dynamic range before they don't notice frame rate, and I think that's why it already shoots 120, but it working in 120, I think it's a lot of battery, a lot of GPU. Bill?
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be the hollow room necessarily. I think it's going to be you on your couch with your device in HDR and something like the AirPod Pros that do a spatial surround for you. I mean, the cost of getting into is not building a new room in your house. You're going to be able to understand this stuff at a relatively small price point.
If you think about LiDAR as well, which we didn't talk about very much, the LiDAR stuff is going to be a big deal because it instantly puts you in your, in a whole, it takes a space that already exists and makes it different. Like we were talking, we did experiments. The reason I scanned my family has a golf course, and the reason we scanned the whole golf course with with GPS and we did a very, very high quality scan, was the idea we were playing with at the time was that you could turn a golf course, you could play different golf games with AR then rather than just playing the one that you walk into. You could have targets that are virtual and all kinds of other things that are all there. Those are things that you can, so you're going to be able to change the real world into something else, not necessarily with VR, but adding things to the physical world, I think. And then there's just tons of information, whether it's going to a museum and getting heads up displays, going to a historical location and seeing what it used to look like. There's so many places that this is going to explode, and the LiDAR is going to be another thing that they barely touched on. I don't think they're ready. They're giving it to us. They haven't told us exactly all the things you could do with it. They're like, oh, that'd be kind of cool, but it's going to be exciting. Next question.
Yeah, to quickly amplify that, you go in a grocery store, look on a shelf, and through this you can tell which has too much salt in it. So there's just 1,000 things. Okay, Jeff Francis from the panel in Columbia, South Carolina says, YouTube, is it possible to release and upload as Premiere, but have the video remain unlisted when it premieres, as a premiere? I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Jeffrey.
Answer is no, because it's premiering a public video, not an unlisted video. I just made sure by uploading a video, and it will not let you premiere anything as unlisted, because it's assuming you're taking control of that for when you want to send it out to your masses.
The way that we did premieres before premieres, I mean, we did hundreds of premieres before the Premiere tool existed, and that was a live stream from a file. So so you can do that unlisted right now. So you just you queue it up, you give it a countdown clock or a slate at the beginning, and then you just, at the time that you want it to premiere, you stream it live. Stream that file out live, and we've done lots of those. I mean, we've done whole days of those. And because the reason that they did that, the reason you have a Premiere, and the reason they created the Premiere tool was because people like us were making a lot of money just doing live streams out, and they didn't like people using the live stream platform that way because they felt like a lot of folks felt like it was inauthentic for the audience because it's not really live, and there's not really any interaction. And so they tried to kind of push that back of don't do that, but we still did it all the time. And I've done everything as short as a music video. I did I can't say really big band, but anyway, so for their music video to premiere it on Facebook. And so we, pushed it out, and it's actually a little stressful at first, but a lot of encoders will I can load the files into the encoder, or you can load it into as a resource into AWS, or you can, play it off of QLab into a, whatever, or Mimo Live can just play it out. So those are all, that's the easiest way. If you want to have more control over your Premiere experience, that's the easiest way to do it, is actually stream a file.
Thank you.
Does that make, yep, absolutely. Next question.
Okay, A. Mitchells in Washington says, recently I saw an event proposal for a live in-person event where all the people in the room will be on their laptop connected into the Zoom with projection and audio of the Zoom. Clients are mostly worried about feedback, but what should they be concerned with instead? How do they avoid pitfalls? Note, does this kind of event even make sense? What is even the role of the tech company for this? And even the host moderators and those on the podium will also be on laptops.
I don't get it. I don't understand. I mean, what should we worry about? We should probably worry about COVID. We should worry about forcing everybody to come to a location and watch something on a screen. I mean, I think the biggest thing we have to be afraid of is that it's not. It just doesn't. I don't track it at all about why you. I mean, the advantage of you're. I don't know. I feel like that sounds like a physical an event company trying to stay relevant and trying to figure out some way to do something like that. But I don't think right now, I personally think it's irresponsible to try to bring a whole bunch of people together in one place. So it doesn't seem like a solid thing. Go ahead, Grant, and then Jeffrey, and then Stuart.
I think it's cool that you gave a non-technical response to that. I mean, I think to answer the question about pitfalls, like you can't have the PA in the room with the Zoom audio and then have people talking in the room on another call, like as another input into that Zoom. Like it's just going to freak out. Yeah. I mean, that you could, I can see some sort of benefit where they're trying to get a talking head of every person and you see everyone no matter where they're sitting. I get that. And so if you really were wanting to do that, you would need to have everyone with headphones in, not use any PA, and everyone is super on top of their mutes. But it will be a headache, literally a headache for everyone, because they would be hearing the delay acoustically in the room, and then they're hearing it in there. So it's really not a great idea. But
like
asking about pitfalls.
Yeah. Well, and we've done ones where we've had a bunch of hosts that they want to interact. They want to have 6 or 8 people interact. They're all in the same place. And what we did is we found different offices in the building. But for 6 or 8, not like 50 or 100, but for 6 or 8 people, we just we lit them and put them into their own rooms, and that worked fine. But it was still kind of, it was mostly so that we could control all the audio and video. Jeffrey, and then Stuart.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, unless they're going to make barriers and plexiglass all around, or have specific, not their laptops, but some sort of monitor system that's static, so they're not jiggling around a laptop. The only thing that I could see as the advantage is it doesn't have those community mics, so they can ask a question to the person, and somebody doesn't have to wipe down an area for the next person to ask a question. But that's pretty much it.
Good, Stuart.
I noticed that there's a follow-up host tech concerns only comment in the chat. In that case, the tech concerns are: do you have a budget for enough sanitizer? Do you have enough budget for masks? All of that sort of stuff.
Well, but also, I think the other tech thing is bandwidth.
Setup. Yeah, but to look at a similar sort of setup, go back and watch Launch America for the Dragon test message or mission, and from the control room, you will see the different setup, especially if you go back to previous SpaceX missions where they spread the desks out. Everybody had masks on. Even the camera crews were all masked up. And you're going to need to do all that sort of separation. So one of your tech concerns is finding a big enough room.
Well, and then there's again bandwidth. You should be allocating about most likely 6.5 to 7 megs per person minimum, and probably 10 megs a person for overhead and everything else. And so you got 50 people there. You need a half a gig of connection. So it's a horrible idea. Like it's just, I'm sorry, that's not a tech answer, but there's the echo that Grant talked about. There's the bandwidth that, here, there's the COVID restrictions. There's the the managing all those in and outs. There's nothing about this that seems like a good idea. I wouldn't even take the job. Like I wouldn't even bid on it. Like if someone brought this in, I'd just be like, you need to find somebody else, because I'm not touching
I
that
just
one.
ask why.
Jeff?
So my daughter told me about her chemistry class at a university that actually was the best use of hybrid that I've heard about so far. And so in a 500-seat lecture hall, there was a 30 or 40 students socially distanced all around the classroom, the additional students online. So, but this was a one-to-many situation. So there was a presenter, and everybody was on their device for seeing slides and other content, and they were in the chat on their device, but we weren't actually asking all the participants out in the seats to be in the Zoom and be talking and interacting that way. So if this event is kind of a few too many, then having the people on stage as the presenters who are traditional PA system out to the audience, and none of the mics of the people on Zoom out in the audience are actually being used, then I could see some reason for these people who are socially distanced to be on laptops that they can get a better view of presentation in there. But that would be more, I guess, attendees in a webinar, so they never get a chance of their audio coming in.
I'd also say that cost per head, it's cheaper to send them a kit at home, than it is to, cost per head for an event like this would be very high. That's the, anyway, let's move on. We got another question.
Okay. Ed Willick in Valley Cottage, New York says, how does anyone understand how to attend does anyone understand how to attend the sessions they've registered for at Zoomtopia? Nothing on their site is explicitly clear.
Go ahead, John.
So I'm logged in right now. I don't see what Grant was showing earlier with the skeuomorphic system. I have a giant list of all the sessions, and the ones that I scheduled are all in green, and it's super easy to navigate. Okay. And then you can filter by the content tracks, so you can drill down to those sessions that you want to see.
Jeffrey?
When I went to zoomtopia.com at the beginning, I think that's where people get confused because they don't see a login or anything like that. I put a link in Makana of where I am, which is 2020.zoomtopia.com. That might be where you see all of a sudden start to see the login options and then be able to go into the interface.
Do you find, John, that there are a lot of times when there's two sessions going on at the same time that you want to see?
Yeah, in fact, that's funny you say that, because I'm doing an event in December, and she broke it into two tracks, and I couldn't get her to split those out in a linear fashion. She just took her agenda from last year and pushed it onto the web. But that's super frustrating.
Yeah, I think there's no reason to do that anymore. We're no longer constrained by time and space. Tracks don't make any sense at all. If you've got 8 tracks, just make it 8 times longer, literally. Let people schedule it in. They schedule it in their time that they come to it. I just think, and I'm kind of amazed that Zoom is doing that, because it's just very old fashioned. And in fact, that their platform is what makes it possible to not do that. Multiple tracks are just, I just think that they're foobar. Anyway, next question.
George S. in St. Louis, Missouri says, I'd like to duplicate your Waves Loudness Meter mic check-in for our weekly Zoom meetings. I see it displayed in a pane as if it was a panelist. Is that a screen share from a dedicated computer with audio routed through audio hijack or sound source, or are you using some other method?
It is a screen share of not a dedicated computer, but a computer that's doing that, and it can be a plugin in anything that takes a VST plugin. So it's that is the wave meters and so you just need to have audio hijack or anything that on a PC, anything that takes a VST plugin, it'll open up and run. So go ahead, Grant.
Yeah, sorry, a screen capture, not a screen share. So
screen
it's
capture.
Yeah.
And we'll do. We have to do a little video, because that question comes up about once a week, because it's a really popular thing, and it makes a huge difference. I think the reason that this is a very listenable show is specifically because it's not so much that 20 is a magic number, negative 20 is a magic number. It's just that it's all the same. Go ahead, Beju.
Yeah, Hasmukh has made a video, I believe. It's in Discord, but I don't think he's made it public, because he was using all the office hours stuff. So if you can find that link, you can probably post that as well.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Doug Ferguson from the panel in Fort Wayne, Indiana says, what are the differences, benefits, disadvantages with the Clearcaster Pro over the Elemental?
I mean, the big thing with the Clearcaster is that it's just going to stream directly to the different services. So the Clearcaster Pro will just, I haven't used the Pro. I used the original. I used a lot of the original Clearcaster when it came out, where it was only linking to Facebook, but I believe it links to just about everything. And so the big advantage is it's just going to stream directly to it, especially when you attach it to Facebook. And I don't know how all the other ones work as well. But when you attach it to Facebook, it's what we call a server-based configuration, which means it checks in with the server and gives the bits to Facebook the way Facebook wants it that day. So it allows them to keep on improving their configuration. And usually that means that its connection to the rest of to Facebook, for instance, is way more stable. So anyway, so that's the, I haven't used the other pro features of streaming to other services, so I'm not entirely clear. I believe that LinkedIn support was in the works, but I'm not sure if it's there yet. Other than that, before that, it was like basically StreamYard was one of the main places to get to LinkedIn if you needed to. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, with the Clearcaster Pro, the big advantage is that it's got 4K, so it's future-proofed. It's rock solid. I mean, it's one of the ones that I would trust over all the other hardware encoders. I haven't got the Elemental to work as well because it's a lot of configuring. So if you want something, and maybe we just need to get the guys back in here from Amazon to walk us through that final hop of once you see the thumbnail image. But on the Clearcaster, you've got a universal mode, which will allow you to RTMP into anything. It's also got SRT as a sender or a receiver. In Facebook, it is the only 1080p encoder so most encoders will send 720, and that's a limitation due to Facebook. vMix, you can also send 1080p now. That's a newer update. But just that rock solid, just being able to remotely access something, flip it on, and have it work. I've ran 24-hour streams that were perfectly in sync at the very end. I mean, you could clap, and it was dead on 24 hours later. And I did that twice, and it just rock solid.
What's the cost on the Clearcaster Pro?
They're $39.95.
Yep, it's a good deal. It's a good deal. Beiju?
Question for Guy. Were you able to test the SRT send and receive from the Clearcaster? How well did it work?
I haven't, because then I got to pop open a second one. Actually, no, I take that back, because my laptop now is strong enough, this one that I'm on, because I've previously tested SRT with Jeff, and you got to have a pretty robust machine to push like high quality SRT. So we got to keep that in mind. So that encoder, that's another reason if you are doing, point to point, it's one of those things where you want reliability. And like when I do 4K with the Clearcaster, it sounds like a jet airplane. The fans kick on. In fact, that's what the difference is between the Pro and the original, is that they increase the throughput of air through the thing, because it is just a monster. I mean, it's full bore, just humming. But yeah, I haven't got to test it. If you have a receive side that's stable, I'm more than happy to flip mine on or give you access to the back end, and you can play with it. I can throw a test pattern in, and you can, or some stock footage or something, let it fly for you.
Yeah. George?
So Alex, I would love, probably we could do a second now on encoders. The show I'm doing tomorrow, I'm actually have a killer view in the mix, the HDMI version. I'm using it with ATM Mini, and I mean it has like a ton of features. It's feature rich. One of the things I find yesterday, and we talked about this before, is going to the hotels. The firewall is actually blocking the encoder from going out, so I had to have them give me a static IP. But I think it's a good idea if we do a second hour in encoders.
Yeah,
because there's so much on the market right now, and the killer view is, the interface is kind of clunky, but I think it's folks that want to get into short term at low cost. I think that it's a good option. We probably should take a look at it.
Yeah, no, we'll take a
I
look at
forgot
that.
one last point on Zixi is what's being used on the Elemental. So if you do get into a low bandwidth situation, it'll throttle down dynamically and be able to still push a signal through that's stable, whereas some of the other encoders will just drop it. So that is a key distinction.
That's been a big thing for us, and being able to completely control it from a distance. So like we don't, the Zixi just, I mean the Elemental link just turns on, and it's you're doing everything in AWS. Then you're not touching the link, other than telling it what its maximum bandwidth usage is. And I just have mine set to 20, so it just all the way up. It just send as much bits down the path as possible. But it will, to Guy's point, flex if it doesn't have enough. It does that pretty intelligently. Next question.
Eric Hall in Mount Vernon, Washington posts, what is your limit for the number of participants in office hours?
There's the limit to number of attendees is 500, is what we have the limit to right now. We've only gotten close to hitting that once. And then the limit that we tend to enforce here is about 49, because it's one one frame. But you know, the most we get to typically on a typical day is 35 to 40, and usually we range in the land of 20 to 30, which is a good, really comfortable thing. When we started streaming everything to YouTube, the numbers went down a little bit, took a little pressure off of our system. So people have been time shifting and watching it on YouTube, and so that's it's made it more comfortable. But we would, because we're streaming to YouTube, there's no real limit, to how many people could watch. They just couldn't watch necessarily inside of Zoom. Go ahead, Grant.
You can have 100 panelists in a webinar.
You could. I would never do that. Like, you can have 100 panelists in the webinar. I would never put 100 panelists in the webinar. The way we use it, because it's such a free-floating conversation. Even when we started getting to, when we get under 20, it starts to feel like we're not able to answer questions as fast. We're not quite as nimble. When we go over 40, it gets to be a little chaotic. So I feel like for our format, the 20 to 40 range is a good number. When we were in 40, 45 for a while, every day, every morning over the summer when things were really closed down. And I started really thinking about restricting it to 25 just because I felt like it was too much chaos. But we've settled into a good space. Next question.
Michael Vospin in Woodstock, Georgia says, let's say an individual or a company sets up a private Zoom event as a concert and charges money for it. It's a private audience and is never posted to social media sites for public consumption. Who tracks the performances and pays the royalties?
Technically, you would need it depends on what country you're in, but in the United States, technically you would need an ASCAP BMI license to do a performance, although it's very complicated because technically you're streaming, which is a whole entirely different licensing issue. It's potentially very expensive. so it depends on how many people are watching, but the license, you're in a real gray area in the licensing at least in the United States. And the reality is that currently no one's doing it. It's private, it's closed, and no one that I know is paying any kind of royalties to anyone inside of Zoom. But you will need to. But we know a lot of people that are doing stuff that aren't thinking about that at the moment. Go ahead, Bill, and then Stuart.
+1 for that. Rights management for all this copyright content that's floating around the web is a disaster right now. And there's money there. There's actually quite a lot of money in these new streaming platforms and these Zooms and things like that. They'll eventually try to figure out how to get it, but they haven't figured it out yet.
I think part of the challenge for copyright holders in general is they made it so complicated that it's hard to stay in line. So I think that there's an issue where some of this stuff needs to be streamlined at some point to make more sense. Go ahead, Stuart.
I'm just wondering, and I think Bill actually just set me on the right sort of answer for what I need. A friend of mine does burlesque events where the performers are actually performing out of their own home via Zoom for paid events. So I'm wondering how that would affect the music for her events. But I think Bill just kind of covered it.
Yeah. Next question.
Okay, Tony Mobley from Often in the Panel and from Newman, Georgia says, is the new HomePod Mini a good solution for listening to office hours?
I don't know how it would be. I guess you could take your phone and just AirPlay it to the thing, and I'm sure it would sound great. Mickey's got our mics are pretty good. They're very even, and Mickey puts it through some compression and limiting. And I think that it would probably sound amazing. Probably better than most radio shows that you hear on a HomePod. Go ahead, George.
I normally pipe mine to the basement. It sounds pretty good. A little bit off topic. I'm just curious. There was so much focus on the HomePod Mini yesterday. So does it mean the 5 I have in my house right now are extinct? Because like for intercom and so forth, they never really talked about, is it going to be able to work with the HomePods? So it's kind of a bummer that you kind of have to, some of the features you're not going to be able to get in the new, unless there's an upgrade coming.
It can upgrade. I don't know why it wouldn't, but maybe not. Go ahead, Courtney.
I haven't asked this before, but is Office Hours listed with TuneIn or any of the other podcast carriers that could be tuned in an audio-only situation? Or?
Not yet. Other than, there's going to be a lot of movement in November for Office Hours. The problem right now is that I'm, other than being being here in the morning with all of you, I'm completely saturated. So every 7 days a week at the moment, between all the projects that we have, or 2 big projects, that's all we're doing right now. And it's just, I don't have any time to do any further development on it. And so, or even think about it. So I just kind of holding the space and making sure we have second hours, and starting to lean on more people in the group to help me with that. But we're still in that process. But we definitely, I think that there's no reason why we can't put this out as a podcast. We can't stream it live, to a variety of services. I mean, we're already streaming it live, but how do we make that more available? So there's a bunch of packaging and processing that needs to happen, that will probably happen through November and December as we kind of turn that corner, if I have just a little bit more time. So anyway, that's where we're at right now. Yep, next question.
Hey, Mitchells, with yesterday's chat being quickly wiped at the end of the Apple Theater event, is there any way to retrieve it for those of the group who read it or read it later instead of live, or needed some of the missing links and text? Is there a better way to handle this sort of sequenced event process in the future? And a note, there are better tools within this chat platform to adapt, or are there better platforms to adapt this kind of situation?
Go ahead, Sky.
I took up the mantle along with Jeffrey that does the YouTube of scraping all of the chat in Mukana and transferring it over to our Discord chat links section. I was out of the office yesterday, and Chris, who is the amazing programmer for Mukana, I forgot to let him know. So we probably did miss yesterday's chat scrape, but traditionally at the end of each session at 10 o'clock or 9 o'clock, I will scrape all of that out of Mukana and transfer it into Discord. That's that part of the workflow question.
And you can pretty much expect anytime we do something that's not part of the normal morning, there's probably not going to be a lot of you're fending for yourself. Like, I'm not, the hard part is that if you start trying to support every possible thing that people want, you start not doing events. You start not doing things because there's now this weight over top of it this overhang of all the things that everyone wanted. And so I'll tend to, especially when we experiment with something, you'll find that I'll tend to just throw all that stuff out, I'm not, and I will admit that I tend to be very present and future based in my thinking. And so if there's something that someone mentions that I really like, I pull it out and I put it somewhere immediately, but I almost never look back. So that's why it tends to be hard to get me to think that way, is because I just don't think about, once it's done, it's kind of, it's already in my rear. It's not even in my rear mirror. I don't even have a rear mirror. It's just done, and I move on to the next thing. Go ahead, Sky.
The only reason I'm interested in it, because I was physically keeping a Google Doc of the things that I wanted to research and have access to, rather than bugging you guys.
I think it's great.
My point is,
it's very fortunate people are managing it. I'm just letting you know that I won't.
Yeah, right. And the way Chris has set it up is so that, and the reason it's set up this way is so all of the chats, if they get scraped, are searchable within the chat links. So with the links and everything. And so that's why it's critical of how we put things in Mukana. It's metadata for us in the history, as our history. Yeah. Thank you.
But I will, just to manage everybody's expectations, is that you'll just know that for most of the things, I get it, but everyone's going to have to fend for themselves on those, because we're going to do the part. But this is all, when people ask why can't we add another feature, this is why I move very slowly, is because I don't want a inflation of expectation. So the reason I'm not adding features very quickly to the group and to what we're doing is because I know that as soon as I add it, that will become an expectation, and then I have to manage it. And so if you're wondering why things move slowly, it's because I need to make sure that I know where that's going to, I look down the path of what am I going to have to do with that process. So anyway, next question.
Charles Klein asks, Alex, what monitors are you using to reference your HDR?
We're using some LG. I don't know what the exact ones are. LG OLEDs. Because the output is streaming, we're mostly looking at it through an Apple TV. So we kind of work on it. The people who are doing the final color correction are on some reference monitors that I don't have to deal with. And so, but what we want to know is, when it comes out of the Apple TV, what does it look like? So that's mostly what our reference monitors are the final output. But there's other folks that are using other reference monitors, and we're researching some to have them internally. But because I'm not doing final color correction, I don't have them internally, because they're expensive. The reference ones, are in the $3,000 to $5,000 range to do that. So to start, and they get up to $50,000. So they start moving in that process. But I'm not processing that at the moment. Next question.
Guy Cochran from the panel in Seattle. Thoughts on the new Panasonic Lumix BGH1 camera?
It looks pretty cool. I mean, Jason sent it to me yesterday, or sent me a link to it. It looks like a slick. This looks like I'm basically a Blackmagic. It looks like a Blackmagic Micro Studio, but the next version. You know, if Blackmagic took it that way with all the little tools actually on it, not a little breakout thing to a VG, to a little 9-pin or whatever. It's a real, it's got SDI outs, it's got IP connections, it's got same size sensor, and so it's micro four thirds, but it can do log, it can do a lot of other things. It's definitely something I'd love to test and play with. It looks like a great little camera. It's twice as much money, than or almost twice what the Blackmagic one is. So you're definitely paying for that extra thing. So
well, and SDI, you're that one thing that you really wanted on the Z Cam. So
yeah,
it looks.
No, I think it looks really impressive. I definitely think it could be a really interesting. I wish it was Super 35 sensor rather than a micro four thirds, but Panasonic is more of a super micro four thirds.
What's the mount?
You could take the Vericam sensor and stick.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
What's the lens mount on it?
It should be micro four thirds MFT.
Yeah. And what's the price point? Does anybody know?
$19.95. Yeah. Stuart.
One for Guy. If you've had any test units, how's it with overheating? Because that's one of the known problems with the Z cams.
I have not tested this model. I was surprised that it even came out because it's basically a GH5 and without the screen, and it does have autofocus, which is a good autofocus compared to some of the other models like the Z Cam. I own a Z Cam. We're a Z Cam dealer, and I'm not impressed with the autofocus. There's lots of videos up there to check out, but I love this form factor for getting in, like the cooking show that Sky's doing. This might be, something to look at, or the Z Cam.
You're evil. You're evil, Guy. Just saying. You're evil in such a good way.
Next question.
Andy Dolphin, Durham, New Hampshire said, what's the difference between the original Mixpre 3 and the Mixpre 3 2?
The biggest difference for a lot of us is that the noise assist is available in the Mixpre 3 2 and not in the it's just different processing. I don't know. Are there any other significant differences between the two? Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, I have the original, and there's the plugins don't work, the downloadable software overlays don't work, but pretty much quality-wise, they're about the same. I don't think they changed the preamps or the signal chain any. It's just mainly, I think they upped the processor a little bit, so you got a little faster processor to handle the plugins and the noise assist, things like that. But other than that, I think they're about the same. I guess do they still sell? I haven't looked recently, Alex. Do they still sell the original?
Not new. I think they have. Go ahead, Guy.
Get them used. Okay.
Yeah, timecode was the other biggie. That's probably the most significant thing besides the ability to add the plugins.
Too, and you have to feed it externally from the original. Right. But they both handle timecode, but it has to be external in the original.
Right. Beju, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, did the original one have 32-bit float, or was that in the 2?
That's in the 2. 32-bit float.
Yeah, 32-bit floats in the new one. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, because I don't think the original has enough processing power
to do that.
Yeah,
you're right. Good point. Next question. I would definitely, if you might be able to get an inexpensive Mixpre 2, and so that might make it worth getting because it's $299 or $399 and not the full price. But at full price or near full price, I would definitely get the second generation. Next question.
Michael J. in New York City says, hi, Alex. Producing music listening events for artists in Zoom. Starting to tighten the production and post with hopes to stream to YouTube. What's to process for getting copyright clearance to avoid takedowns? We have artist approval.
They need the copyright holder. There's a CMS that's available to copyright holders inside of YouTube, and you need to go into that CMS and you need to clear list the channel. So say this channel is approved to play this song or these songs or across the board. inside of YouTube, but their approval doesn't mean anything. I mean, a written approval doesn't mean anything. Someone has to go into that CMS inside of YouTube to make that to click the little bits that identify the channels that are allowed to use it, and what songs or all the songs or so on and so forth that are allowed to use it, and then that will protect you from the YouTube eye. And then the next thing that you do is in that channel, once they said that they've done it, create an unlisted event and play the song out into that unlisted event and watch what happens, and just see if you get flagged, see if you get takedown, see if you get, there's a bunch of different things that could happen during that piece. And so you want to not take their word for it, but you want to actually test it. And then that will help figure it out. And that's why we try to get that approval done 2 weeks before our event, so that when it doesn't work, which it almost never works the first time, we can go back and talk to them about it a little bit more, and finally get it actually activated a little further down the path. Go ahead, Sky.
CMS stands for
Content Management System.
Service.
Yeah. Next question.
James Babbitt in San Diego. Apple TV Plus and other providers have archives of shows in Dolby Atmos and Dolby Vision. Would you add a new Atmos or home theater section to Discord?
Yes. Yeah, we'll add that this week. That's a good idea. Next question.
Tony Mobley from Newman, Georgia again said, I did not get any of the emails from office hours this morning. I normally get 2. Did anybody else experience this?
Yeah, we're trying to identify what the issue is. I think it's because usually I edit the little email that you get out. I edit it about 5:30 in the morning. I get up in the morning. There's no reason for me not to do it right now. So right when I get off, I should do it. But usually what happens, I have a 9 o'clock call or a 9 o'clock meeting. So I come out of this and I immediately switch gears into work. And so my time to work on this, to plan things and everything else, is 5:30 in the morning to 6 o'clock. And so usually at 5:30, I get up and I have a cup of coffee, and I'm up for a while. I have another meeting at 5 and another meeting at 4:30. So but when I get out of those meetings, I usually 5:30 to 6 is my office hour planning time. And so I usually edit at the beginning of the day. If I get into something where I'm trying to figure something out, this morning I was trying to figure out why Videoscopes wasn't doing what Scopebox wasn't doing what I remembered it doing. And so if I edit the text after 5:50, it seems that it creates a problem inside of the system, and it either comes out late or doesn't come out. This is the second time that's happened. So we're starting to develop a pattern of I just need to edit it earlier, probably the night before. I'll just set a little alarm that tells me at 8 o'clock at night to change the text. It's not hard anymore because and the reason it's happening is because I'm editing the text now all the time, so that you guys get something every day. It wasn't happening before because I never touched it. It just was the general email. And then I realized, I could put the emails right in here. And so that's what's causing the trouble, I think. Anyway, next question.
Tony Mobley's back again with, I didn't get a chance to watch the Apple event yesterday. Was there any conversation about Filmic Pro and the new iPhones?
No specific conversation. No, they didn't show anything specific with Filmic Pro, but I'm sure it's going to work great. Next question.
Next question is Ed Willick. Alex, you look more zoomed in with less headroom than normal. Did you change something in your setup, or did you just decide to frame tighter?
I just like to be tighter. No. So the issue is that my other camera, my Blackmagic camera, is a little further back. So when it zooms in to frame the gray screen in the background, I can be a little wider. I pulled a piece out that I forgot to put back in at the office, which is my web presenter. And so the camera, I had to popped a Brio in, and it just turned out that I had to zoom in a little bit more in the Brio to get rid of the frame. I think I can probably pop this up here. Hold on, I'll show you. So, this is you see the frame right there. I guess I could frame out a little bit, but I had to get to a point where you didn't see the upper corner right there. So anyway, that's why it's framed that way, is that the Brio needs to be framed to this point at this distance. And that gets into when you don't have a lot of space behind you, why it's so useful to have a camera go further back and then zoom in, because it's going to compress that field of view. Anyway, so as it gets closer, you have to have a bigger background. Anyway, next question.
Vincent Alvarez is doing a forensic analysis of the Apple event yesterday. He says, I noticed no orangey, smoky skies in yesterday's Apple event. Any guess when they were shot? I should think about the time of the fires, but the skies say otherwise.
Yeah, I probably they were shot relatively near to the event. You know, I would say probably my guess is a week or two before the event. You know, I don't think that, you know, my guess is I have no idea. Like I'm not connected to anybody that was working on it, but on the post anyway. And so but I don't have any I don't have any idea, but I would think that for a lot of these events, you try to cut it as close as you can because you're afraid you're going to say something that doesn't make sense, you know, if news happens or something like that. And so what you end up doing is planning a lot of things really carefully with a lot of previs and a lot of other bits and pieces, and then executing, you know, executing all of that and piecing it together. But no more than 3 weeks out is my guess. And I don't think we've been relatively clear skied for a while. And then all those warehouse shots, which are probably some of the most complicated shots in it, didn't matter, you know, what was outside because it was all inside. And the windows are probably still inside too. Anyway, next question.
I think that's it. I think we're officially out of questions.
Good, just a little bit heavy. So, so now what we're going to do is we're going to shift gears to video scopes. We're going to take another pass at it. We got one more question here from Stuart. We'll go ahead and throw it in here, and then we'll go to video scopes. Oh, it is for video scopes. Easiest way to show the difference between 709 and HDR. So the new video scopes that I'm not sure what. It's a good question. Something I was thinking about this morning was all the current HDR footage that I have is not something that I can put into a screen share, especially to YouTube. So I need to kind of think through how to show that from a HDR perspective. But let's see here. Let me pull up Scope Box here. But yeah, it's the easiest way to show it. I mean, there are scopes, and the new Scope Box says that it handles, you know, high dynamic range, and so it's
isn't the easiest way just look at the scale showed on your scopes and see if it tops at 120 or goes way above that?
Well, no, it won't go way. Well, it depends on so the scale will reset, you know, in the scopes. And so, you know, where you are in the scale, it actually doesn't, when you put, the scales are different for log and for HDR. So it's not going to look the same as it goes through, but I don't have a lot of good examples this morning. A lot of this was that I felt like, and I don't know if we'll do it any better today, but I felt like we didn't do a very good job on the last one when we did audio scopes and video scopes. And so the attempt is really to go back and talk through it a little bit more. Yeah. So that was, so we have to kind of, think that. So we'll take a look at that one as we kind of go through that. There was a question from TJ Asher about yesterday's. I showed some stuff in yesterday's that I shouldn't have, so that one got taken down. so we'll see if we can put that back up. So there was some extra data there that I can't, you know, when I went to a screen share that nothing horrible, but it's not stuff that can be on YouTube. So that's the danger of streaming to YouTube. Yeah, there's a lot of questions here. I think that I don't know what we probably ought to do is schedule another one, maybe even next week, to talk about HDR in general. Like, I think that an HDR discussion probably makes more sense for that rather than doing HDR in the scope stock, because I'm not prepared for that. So to show that, but I think that talking through HDR log 709 is a great set of questions, Stuart, and we'll definitely. I just have to prep some footage. That's all, that of my kids or something else other than what I have in front of me right now. So let me we'll work on HDR for next week.
That does RAW, Alex. I could always send you a sample.
I just can't process it in real time before I show it right now. That's all. I mean, you can definitely send me something for next week. Absolutely, if you've got some sample files. I've got a bunch of stuff. I just haven't rendered it out this morning. So because it wasn't on my
garden and film bees and do that sort of stuff, and that might
no, I've got stuff. I've got some pretty fun footage that I can show. I just don't have it rendered out and ready to drop in while you all are watching. So that would be that'd be the limiter at the moment. So anyway, so let's talk a little bit about it. I mean, I think that one of the things that I wanted to do here is let's see if I can load this up here. This may take a couple passes here. We'll see how this goes. Okay.
While you're pulling that up, I just want to say on Zoomtopia, I'm watching kind of on a second screen here where the guy, the CEO, Eric, is in that same kind of Tony Robbins looking virtual set. I don't know if anybody else has scoped it out.
Lots and lots of little screens.
Yeah, they cut to the other shot, the reverse, and you're able to see it.
Have you noticed, Guy, that they've got an interlaced signal going in? So you can see it. You can see it break up.
Well, and it's not a great green screen either. Why has it got a little ticker on it? Or it's got the
buffering.
It says it's buffering, but his video's still moving.
That's my iPad. It's pulling hard, I guess.
He almost put his hand over the graphic. I wanted to see whether that was keyed on top or behind.
Right.
And all that wind in the studio, he needs to make sure to have a wind.
Yeah.
So mine's
I always think it's funny when you do that when you're in the. I don't understand. Like I'm always like, who was the A1 and A2 on that gave them a windscreen on a.
I paid for it. I'm going to use it.
I don't know.
That's also a pop filter, but yeah.
It is only if you put the mic in the wrong place. You know, like it's a pop filter if it's in front of their mouth. It's absolutely a pop filter, but it's not like if you put the mic where it belongs, especially if you're doing it, if you're setting someone up, there's no reason not to not have it.
Looking at the camera.
Yeah. Anyway,
downstream key. I think he put his hand behind it.
Yeah, quick look at the videos that Guy and Grant were both sharing. I'm assuming they're coming from the same website, but the colors were completely different.
Yeah, I've got some night mode going on my iPad.
Oh, there you go.
Anyway, mine's in Zoom. It's a Zoom webinar that I've gone into. Guy, are you doing the YouTube stream? Or?
No, I'm doing the Zoom webinar.
Zoom
it was
well.
the app
Okay.
on the iPad.
Copy. Yeah.
What I will say before we go into the scopes discussion here is that I think that this is, if we think about the Apple event yesterday, which of course had a big budget, and we look at the Zoom one, which potentially could have a big budget, and we think about how compelling it is to have someone standing next to having a pre-produced video that looks great and is cut tightly to a stage presentation. I think that should be arresting for a lot of people who are thinking that we're going to go back to stage presentations. I don't think that Apple could go back. If they do one or two more, it's over, because I don't think I could watch an Apple keynote after watching what I saw yesterday. I don't think I could go back to watching someone stand on stage. And I think that watching this is even more, it makes it more clear to me that I don't want to go back to people standing on stage talking about things, because what you can do on stage is so much more limited to, and I think that it makes it less compelling. I think this is also a problem we're ending up with education, is that, once we start cutting things together and making them great, it's hard to go back to watching someone just stand there and talk. Go ahead, Bob. I know we're going a little heavy on this, but it's fine.
Yeah.
Okay.
I used to work on the Apple Live events. And of course, when I was doing it, you couldn't talk about it, which is marvelous. And we did one at the Flint Center where they built a whole new building just outside of the Flint Center, this huge white monolithic thing. They spent somewhere between $20 and $30 million to do that.
Yep.
To put the whole event together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't think we're going back there.
Yeah.
And I think the Apple advantage is that they, in the history of their companies, have always put aesthetics and information delivery on the same level, where most companies, particularly now in the middle of this, we're growing so fast, they focus on getting the information out, which is great, but they don't have that same aesthetic level evenness that Apple has traditionally had.
Yeah. And again, I just don't. Go ahead.
I was going to say, I think they should change their script styles as well now, because everybody's doing it. I was thinking, watching the Apple Supercut this morning, There's nothing wrong with it. Don't get me wrong. It was well executed for what it was, but Microsoft are doing it. Google are all, it's the same. It feels like the same person's writing the same material because everyone is pumped or very excited or thrilled, and they're just giving out the same old material each year. But it sounds like I've heard that every time. So
Well,
they ought to change their style completely.
That's just the
The new way.
safe thing for when you're handing an executive a teleprompter concept, because these, again, some of these people are getting a lot of media training, as Alex will attest to, but again, that's not their main job. That's not where they get their money from. So it is a weird dynamic of personality versus intellect.
Well, and when you get into how the sausage is made, the big problem is that there's just a lot of stakeholders that all want you to say something. This feature has to be outlined, this stat, this whatever. And so you walk into if you're writing it, you walk into it and you have a bunch of dreams of what you could say that would get people excited. And by the time you finish the second meeting, you're trying to figure out how to cobble this all together into something.
It's all bullet points.
Yeah, it's just, and so you're just kind of like, okay, all right, we're gonna
It's
do
tech nerds'
this.
fantasy to see the numbers, but actually, I think to general audience, they don't
No,
care.
it's hard. It's hard for people to, like a good example, and we'll go to scopes here in a second, but a good example of that is that no one cares about 5G in the United States. Like we spent 20 minutes on that in that one, or 15 or 20 minutes on that demo yesterday talking about 5G, and no one cared. Like we were just waiting for them to stop talking. Like it doesn't mean anything to us. And so it's just, but I'm sure that it meant a lot to Verizon. But it didn't mean anything to us. I mean, we were just like, oh my gosh, let's move on to the camera. Like if Apple talked about for camera first, no one would watch the rest of the thing. Like people buy their cell phones because of cameras. They don't buy it for any other reason.
I was wondering, did anybody else pick up that point when they were talking about the new HomePod Mini, that they've already done or are going to do a deal with Amazon Music for that? I thought that was unusual for Apple.
Yeah, and not Tidal or Spotify.
Exactly.
I thought that was interesting. So anyway, anyway, that's a whole other story. We'll move on. All right. So let's talk about scopes. Let me open up this thing here. So we're going to talk a little bit about what different scopes look like and some of the ways that we can use them. And I didn't have a couple of these plates before, so I wanted to kind of show it there. This may or may not be, depending on how people ask questions, we'll see how long this one goes. But the next time I do this, I want to bring in some folks that make scope stuff so that we can talk about it with them. But I wanted to have one more kind of prep here so that we kind of know what we're talking about before we bring somebody else in, or know enough that all of us can have a reasonably good set of questions. So let me screen share here. So this is what we didn't show last time, was this is what we use to match our cameras almost all the time. So this is a it's called a Cameline Chroma Demand chart. And it's made by DSC Labs, and it's expensive. I think I have, hold on, I have a small version over here. It isn't as expensive. Oh, if I reach over. So this is the one that I carry. This is the little one that I carry for this type of thing. It fits in my carry-on, which is the important piece here. So here's a back focus. This is like a very small color chart that does many of the same things there. This is just looking at just the gray. So these are the color cards. It's pure white, and it's a nice little flip card. Kind of just general, like all the different, not all, but many of the different skin tones, so you can kind of see what that looks like.
Alex, you're screen sharing so the audience can really see.
Like that, just showing you all these great things. All right. So what I was going to show is that these are a lot of different charts that we use. This is a resolution chart, focus chart, color chart. So this is a smaller version of what I'm showing you now. I'm going to go back to screen share. This company makes a lot of them, and for everyone asks, they never give me any of them. I have to buy them all. So I always like, I'd love to do a test, and they're always like, no, you have to pay for it. So I was like, okay, fine. So so these are So this is just an example of a line chart, and those trumpets on the sides are focus. I mean, or resolution. So as that trumpet gets smaller, you can tell whether it's resolving to a certain resolution, and then you have your gradients, that are through here. And then these colors, what's interesting about these colors here, if I pull this aside, you see how this color, as you look at these, let me make this a little smaller. As you look at these colors that go around, what you're going to see is they very carefully build this little grid that goes through these, these pieces here. So if I click on this and I go, and I think it's almost always 2x zoom. There we go. So this one was just shot. I think I grabbed this from the B&H site, but it's not perfectly accurate. But you can see what it's designed to do with these color squares is actually draw a line through this vector scope or draw it nearby. So what you actually end up doing is when you show this chart in the scopes, in a vector scope here, it'll give you a design that you're expecting in that scope to set those cameras. Now, here's the caveat with this is how you set a camera to be perfectly accurate. A lot of creative directors or other directors want it to not be perfectly accurate. They want it to be a little warmer. They want it to be a little cooler. And so it doesn't necessarily, the vector scope works really well when attached to this. Now but that's something to kind of consider. But that's when you see a vector scope and you see someone using this chart, that's what they're trying to achieve, is getting these to go as close to through the different pieces of the vector scope to make that work. Now you'll see this little line here, and we talked about this before. This little line is where skin tone lands. And when I show another clip here in a second, you'll get to see that. But and it's all skin tone, it's interestingly enough. Now, the other side of this is you see these stair steps that are going on. Now, this is one that isn't lit completely accurately. So you can see this kind of, this line that you look at in the waveform here. That's the gray, just the gray of this. And you see how this is a little brighter than this is over here. So it's a little brighter on one side than it is on the other. That's this gray line that goes through here. And these kind of brighter areas, these are actually the trumpets, right here. So you get used to, as you start to look at these, you start to get used to what you're actually seeing, in this piece. Now, these stair steps that go up and down, again, what this is the luminance value as you scan it up this way. So that's all these stair steps here. What you can use when you're matching cameras is this. So when these all align, they're all in the same gray space. But if they're in a slightly different space, what you can do is be going back and forth and seeing what the difference is and how in this chart, how each camera is looking at this in red, green, and blue. And then by breaking it out, and what RGB parade is actually this waveform. This waveform here, or what we call waveform, that's a sum of all of the RGB parade. So that's all of these combined together. Whereas these are the same thing, the brightnesses, but only the brightnesses in red, green, and blue. And so that is and so as you start to look at these, a lot of cameras will show you a lot of different things. The ones the two scopes that I use probably more than any other scope is the waveform and the RGB parade. And probably the RGB parade is probably the one scope that if I don't have it, then I don't have a scope video set of video scopes that I can actually use. I mean, there's a lot of other parades you can see that let's see if this is let's see if there's something funky about this. Let's see. This is a new version of Scopebox that I haven't quite figured out. So, and this is the YCBCR. So this is a slightly different way of looking at that color that I don't find particularly useful. But there's a lot of other ones that are there. The RGB parade is the one that makes the most sense. Now, a lot of you are used to something like this, which is, if I haven't, there we go. So this is histogram is what most of us think about when we come from Photoshop, right? So this is the population of pixels from the darkest to the brightest. And I don't think that it's a super useful way to look at stuff, but it is if you're in Photoshop or if you come from Photoshop, the Luma histogram is something that you're used to looking at to do that. But in the video world, these are the things that we tend to look at, and I probably look at this one more than any other. What I'm looking for is, whether we're going over. In this case, this is an 8-bit, but whether we're going over 100 or below this. Now, the other thing you'll look at here that I can't really adjust in this space is you're looking to make sure that some of your blacks are actually hitting, but not going below 0. One of the big things is if you see someone that doesn't have quite enough contrast, they look a little like, it's usually because these blacks aren't hitting across. Now, one of the things that we do what we use this for, or what I use this for a lot, is green screen. And so I don't know how to tune a green screen. To be honest with you, I don't know how to do it if I don't have scopes. So let me take this out. Any questions from the panel? Let's see. Bill, do we have any we got not that many questions popping up here?
Yeah, we have one from Doug Ferguson that just came in a little while ago. Let me push it over into the display so you can see it. He asked
the name of those scopes.
The name of which scopes?
The ones that you were just showing. Sorry, I interrupted.
The scopes or the program?
Program.
This is called Scope Box.
Thank you.
And a lot of these are built into the NLEs and things like that. So they don't work for that. Doesn't work for live cameras, but if you get shots in, you can still see the same stuff. Doug Ferguson asked, would the Marshall M Lynx 702W with scopes be a good purchase? He's, I guess, looking for something to read scopes with in the field.
Yeah. What I would say is if it carries RGB Parade, absolutely. I mean, a lot of cameras have it built in now, like the Blackmagic cameras, I think, have some. Let's see here. Yeah. So I think that's that looking at it really quickly, it looks like it's got a great set of scopes. I'm just looking at the Marshall site. It does look like
Video Assist also has the scopes built in, I think.
Yeah. And the main one you want to look for, again, for me anyway, is RGB Parade, because I use that to sync my cameras together. So I use that to make have my cameras fit in the same color space. And then the other thing that I use them for is green screen. So this is a good example of, let me do a screen share here. So here you can see what you're looking at here. This is what happens when you my poor wife did this a couple years ago, and she's had to put up with me using it as an example for a decade. So anyway, but what you can see here is this this big green space right here is that is the green, right? And what we're trying to do when we're looking at a scope is we want this to be as flat as it can be and as thin as it can be. So the more accurate our green screen and the flatter our green screen is, and if you look at when you get used to doing this with scopes, you'll shoot green screens that are cleaner than anybody ever shoots them. I've had DPs come in and I've never seen a scope look like that, or I've never seen a green screen that flat. And it's because you have the pieces here. And if we watch it play out, you'll see her moving here. See her hands moving. And so as we kind of move through this, you can see, so these are her hands in that area. And then these are her, that's her. And then there's just a little bit of green at the top of the frame. That's what we're seeing here. And then you have all the green that's through here that's running about 60%. When you're looking at a green screen, as this line gets wider, it means that you've got a larger gradient here to here. So as it tilts, if it tilts, it means that it's brighter over on one side and darker on the other. But the overall distance, whether this line is tilting or whether it's just wide, that you're using up all of those greens, and you're gonna have to key all of those out. And when you key them out, it means it's a bigger chunk of your image that you have to remove, which means all your little edges start to come apart because you're not you're having to pull them with it, as it kind of goes through that system. And then if we look at it now, this is what green on. Let's see here. RGB Parade.
And you're saying 60% is the
it's
target?
Really, this was shot a while ago. If I said it now, I'd probably say 70% is probably overall better, probably just a touch brighter than this. So, but 60 to 70%. The main thing is but 60% is fine, because if you look at this, this is the RGB parade. Now, this is what we call green on green. So there are green bulbs on a green screen, which means that your red and blue values are very low. And so the delta when you're building, when you're doing a green screen specifically, and I know there's a lot other things we can talk about with scopes, but we're just going to talk a little bit about this. The delta from here to here, or from these two, you want it to be at least 40 points. So you can see this is at 100 and let's say 180, and this goes down to, the same point here is in the 50 range, and so there's like 130 points between them. That's a lot of, I got a lot of room to work, when it comes to figuring that out. And where does that make a difference? It makes a difference in things like, if you look at the video of her doing it, where you get more detail is in the hair and also in the motion blur. So if the more accurate what you're losing when you are not disciplined about your green screen. I know this is kind of turned into a green screen talk, but no one's asking any questions, so we're just gonna keep on talking about this.
In that case, I want to quickly interrupt with a question, Alex. Do you still have the vector scope on double sampling rate or double sample size?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
I'm just looking at where the green splotch is, and I would have expected the green screen to actually be square in that box.
Yeah, it's pretty close. If I go back down to 1, you'll see that it's not square in the box, but it's pretty darn close. If this was at 100% right here, this would be right in the box. So but where when you're looking at this, for instance, when you see her hands up here, it's this interaction between the person and the green screen. This is this disruption of that's where your key lives, right? Is where this when you're looking at this is what are you going to have to work with, to get those fine edges. And so the reason we're so adamant about scopes when we're doing green screen specifically is because I really need the separation to be I want to use all of my keying to work on these edges here, not on just trying to, when you have a rough background back here and you're using most of your compositing to get rid of the background, you've lost all the detail that you can get in motion blur and along these fine edges here. So that's the thing. Now you'll also notice as we look at these scopes, if you notice that her she doesn't look completely contrasted, so there's a little bit of the blacks never get to all the way to black, and we would be able to tell that looking at the scope right here. So just looking across this scope here, I could tell you this before I even saw the image, that her black jacket is not gonna, there's no point where it's really black, where it's full contrast, because I can just look at the scope and just see that it's stopping at about 5%. So, and I don't have an adjustment here to do this, but if I made an adjustment to the image, I would be able to, this just reads the image. It doesn't affect the image. But if I made an adjustment to the image, I could push this down just a little bit, and it would make the image pop a little bit more, because the blacks were popping out there. So again, just like what we talked about with audio yesterday, with video, you want to being able to look at this all the time, having scopes up all the time makes a big difference, because your eyes, your brain will start to connect what it's looking at in the real world to what you're doing as you work through it. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, I just wanted to note that it was, as I was learning green screen decades ago, before I learned to read scopes against it, the big problem is you throw up a green screen and you try to get the lighting even, and you look at the camera and then you try to pull the key and it doesn't work, and you don't really know what to do. The whole purpose of what Alex is talking to you about using scopes and bringing them up, is suddenly you have metrics. This is what's wrong. I can see that this level is not where it should be. So you start making adjustments to move those levels to where they should be, and suddenly your keys start getting better and better and better. So this is as much science as it is, I'm looking at it, does it look right? That kind of doesn't work when you're trying to pull a really good key.
And most people we work with don't use scopes to do their keys, and they don't The keys are a lot harder. They don't look nearly as good. And when I'm looking at it with a green screen, if I have my lights up that I'm working with, I can literally, I'll look at my scopes, and I'm moving my light looking at the scopes. So just watching because you can't see it. You can't see the green that accurately through your eyes. And so I look at the scopes, and now there's other things that I do that I can't show right here, which is I increase the contrast, oftentimes, so that it's very, everything kind of jumps out. But when I'm looking at the scopes live and I'm moving the light, I can very quickly line up a green screen to put that together. Go ahead, Courtney.
And so you can see from your example there, that your green screen was lit a little darker on the left than it is on the right. Yep. And but the accuracy, so the thickness of that line at the top determines the accuracy of the hue or the color, the green, and how much it deviates off of 100% green. And whether it goes down determines the lighting of the background.
Absolutely. Sky asked real world matching colors with the GH4 and the MP and Blackmagic. Yeah. So what I would do to do that is go back to the Dumont chart. So if we go back to the screen share here.
Well, I also just shared yesterday's attempt at this, and I'll call it an attempt, but I'm going to be doing a lot more of it. And so I'd love to.
So the main thing is whether you're using a smaller chart, not a Dumont chart, but whether you're using a smaller chart or a chart like this, what you're going to want to do is you look at what the colors look like on one camera, and you're trying to get these colors regardless of what they look like, but you want something that represents lots of different colors. You can very quickly get gray to match actually in a scope, and it's not matched. So one color doesn't give you enough points of reference to kind of see what's going on. So what you need to do is by having whether it's some kind of color chart, chip chart or whatever, you want to see that color chart in RGB Parade. Then you want to side by side that with with your other camera, and then you're working in whichever camera is easier for you to make adjustments to. Well, so I would say I would always match
the Blackmagic is the golden camera with the Sigma lens.
But what I would say is that it's easier. Yeah, you could use that. Zoom in on that. This one will work a little easier, but that should work. I'd probably try to get a bigger one if I were you. I mean, I would get a bigger chip chart than that to do it. But the one of the things
I am going up to guys today. So
there you go. Get something that's like 8.5 by 11 or 8. But this one, the ones that again, these are pretty good size. This is about 8.5 by 11 size. The main thing is as you're looking at it. When you're matching these cameras, you're not looking at what your best camera is, because usually you're not matching to the best camera. You're matching to the most flexible. You're matching the least flexible camera is your base camera.
Yep.
If you're trying to match two cameras because you have more. So because the Blackmagic camera can connect to your ATEM, and you have very fine control over the Blackmagic shading or color, you're actually going to find it easier to color the Blackmagic camera than so you get the GH4 to be exactly what you want.
Yep.
And then you have the Blackmagic match that. And we get stuck with that all the time. It's why we avoid using little cameras. We try to, because it's like, we have to, we've got a handy cam. So you either decide that it's not going to match, like it's never going to, and that means that you're never cutting two things where you can really compare it. So you can do a reverse camera and have the three or four that are working together have to look exactly the same. The reverse camera can be close. And you can get away with it. So, but we try to match the same. This is getting into color matching, but yeah, I mean, it's a lot of what we use scopes for. But the main thing is that you, once you start using scopes to do this, what I will say is that you'll find it a lot faster and a lot easier to do it with scopes.
Yes, please.
Than doing it with your eye, because it's very subjective, and the scopes will just tell you this is the same or it's not.
Well, that's why I want to learn more better.
Yeah, absolutely. And probably the next generation of this is matching cameras. There's probably an hour of us just talking about matching cameras and pulling up cameras with scope, with charts, and matching the two together. It's probably something that would be useful.
Well, I sent the link that I put in the Makana is my attempt of yesterday. And like I said, I will be doing, this is the gear that I've got, the Shetland pony and the plow horse, and that's what I've got. So
right. Yeah.
Guy had his hand up, and then there's a question from Stuart about Scopebox.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind taking a look at my share screen to show some vMix scopes, it might be something you can walk me through with this camera that's new and kind of overly saturated. Can you make me a co-host?
Beige, you would, I think, have to do. Who's? I don't know.
I think I've got co-host, so I think I can do it. So let me see if I can get.
I don't think I can make him co-host. It has to be. Okay.
It's done.
Okay, great. All right.
Are you able to see that?
Yes.
So basically, I've got the color wheels open, and I'm trying to see if it's, So you can see black and white if I pull that saturate. Are you seeing the color wheels?
I am.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Okay. So if it's overly saturated, yeah, you can see that value popping.
And one of the things you'll notice is this is something that a lot of people miss is they'll look at, if you don't look at the RGB parade, if you're only looking at Luma, can you open a Luma? I don't know if you can open Luma, just a regular waveform without
so can you maximize your scope window so we don't see the rest of your desktop and then we see.
Yeah. Okay, let me see.
Just one little point while you're there. In the screen before, you notice how the green was depressed, and that's because the scene doesn't have much green except for the natural green of balanced color. Right. So if he had green content in his picture, that green scope stuff would have showed it.
But if you look at this, now this is still breaking it up, but if you go to just the Luma, if you go back to the scopes and the selection of scopes in that, where were you selecting those?
Sorry, I can't get to it because it's covered up by my screen share thing. Let's see if I can make it smaller again.
What I was going to say is that a lot of times when people are just doing pure, when people are doing just pure Luma, a pure waveform, they won't understand why something is starting to flatten out. Let's see if there's a waveform. Let's try waveform Y. It might be waveform Y that is there. Yeah, so that's your, now, for instance, if you look at that, the shirt doesn't look like it's, in the waveform, doesn't look like it's oversat, it doesn't look like it's peaking, but we can start to see the red, start to drop out. And so when you're looking at the waveform, a lot of times you'll look at it and you'll go, well, it's not, nothing's overexposed. But if you go back to RGB parade, so if you go back to RGB parade, Guy. What you'll see is that right now it's either peaking or getting very close to peaking. And definitely if it gets more saturated, if Guy affects the saturation at all, what you're going to start to see is that red is, and I can't see where 100% is. It does look like it's starting to peak from my perspective, but the red is starting to clip. And so what'll happen is that the RGB parade will show you that certain colors are clipping, not the overall image, but certain colors are starting to get clipped. And we see that in people's skin a lot, where there's a little bit of where they're starting to flatten out. So when you start to see something in an image and you start to see the color flattening on their shirt or their face starting to flatten, what that means is one channel, not the whole thing, but one channel is now peaking, is going over 100, and you're losing detail in that channel. And it's easier to see when you're in an RGB parade than when you're in, and that's where you sometimes use the other scopes as well, the CB, CR. Go ahead, Stuart, and then Courtney.
Yeah, Guy, where it says display color wheels on your color breakout there, click on that and it will change to the bar graphs. You'll be able to change one color at a time.
This one?
Oh, there you go.
Yep, there you go. Now you can do lift, gamma, and gain on each color individually, so you'll be able to pull the red out by itself.
So do you feel that I'm overexposed? Let's make it back to vector scope plus preview. Am I looking, okay, so the flesh tone line, I'm off.
Well, it may be your flesh tone is in that little piece of that line, but yeah, you might be a little off by a little. But I don't try to correct.
What adjustments would you make if this was your show?
That big spike above it
is your
shirt, probably, because it's almost pure red.
So the thing for me is that I'm not.
Will rotate it, won't it?
Yeah, go ahead.
Won't the hue rotate the colors?
Go ahead. Yeah, grab onto hue and it should just rotate. Yeah, there we go.
There you go.
Not good.
And this, kids, is why the guys sitting in the back of the trucks doing camera control unit get paid a lot of money.
But what's interesting is that now, but the thing is again, when you're looking at the scope and you're playing with one of these dials, you're now starting to really understand how that dial works. Like, like as you look at the scopes, you're starting to see how each dial is interacting with your image. Go ahead, Sky.
I was going to ask the question eventually of the HDR, and when that adds a whole another scale, and
it does, and we're not going to talk about that today, but we'll,
no, but
yeah, we'll get into HDR. We're going to talk a lot about it.
Baby steps, and Guy lives right across from the nuclear sub plant, so that's why
you just learned how really bad music videos are made.
Yeah, exactly. Go ahead, Courtney.
And when you were talking about the color exceeding 100%, and you see it in what you see in the images is take on that kind of solarized look. Is that what you're kind of talking
Well,
about?
it starts to flatten out. So, Guy, if you start to go up, you look at his shirt, and as he starts to increase the saturation, you'll see how it starts to look flatter. It's not just that it's more saturated, but there are certain parts of it you're losing detail.
Yeah, right.
It's not, the Luma is not over it's just the red channel is clipping. And just, so more and more of those fine red channel areas are starting to clip. And we see that again in skin a lot. When people it will get to a certain brightness and the red starts to clip on their skin, and they'll look a little flatter. But it's not if someone only looks at one scope, they won't see it, and definitely you won't know that unless you really have an attuned eye to it, you won't see it happening when you're just watching either. So that's the other challenge. So,
one other point to make there about the colors, Alex, is every monitor is different. And if you just go by what's on the monitors, you'll get it wrong.
Well, and that's, as you were talking about what monitors, or somebody asked the question, I know Panasonic we used in a lot of edit suites. And then there for quite a while, DreamWorks and HP went together, did a Dream Color thing. But of course, the Sony was the $80,000 de facto golden standard for the longest time, at least in LA.
Stuart has a question about whether Scopebox is just in the Appleverse or whether there are tools available to do the same thing on what he calls the majority of computers.
Yeah. So I think that it's starting to play with these, and I guess the goal is always to figure out ways that we can start using these in every production, and just keeping them up all the time. You just want to start having them opened all the time, and so that's probably the most important thing for you as you start to look at this is just how do we keep them in, how do you keep it open? If you just get into the habit of opening the scopes and looking at scopes, then you're able to, your eye and your brain will start to connect what it's looking at. That's really how we, as babies, when we start, we have a whole bunch of input that doesn't mean anything. And we slowly correlate that input to the world, right? And so when we have scopes open all the time, we're slowly correlating correlating what we're seeing to those two pieces. And we always joke, the Matrix reference of, after a while it's just blonde, brunette, you see the code of what you're looking at. And once you get used to that, you don't want to, I don't want to have discussions about it. I just want to, go down that path. Go ahead, Sky.
Well, Stuart, I'd love to, now that, see, as an editor, you're the last person, the cameraman just is off doing another thing and I get to deal with whatever I get. And then now that I'm at the front of story, it's like, oh, now I have to dog food my own product. And so I'd love to have you teach me, and maybe you and I can do some work on trying to match these cameras.
Go ahead, Stuart.
One of the things I end up upsetting people with is saying the cinematographer should always be present with the colorist to make sure that the basics are right before you set the color tone of the project.
Well, there's people that'll tell you one way or the other.
Correction and
You're
But
talking about
I upset people by I wanted it to be right first.
Well, the thing is what is right and what is the communication, that's a whole topic, because DPs have this whole thing where they want to burn it in. They want to burn in their look. They want it to look that way, but the producer and the director and everybody else goes, let's keep it fully, let's keep the full wave, the full data, and then when they go into colorist, they do whatever they're going to do. It's not, they don't have it be what's right is what comes out the other end, right?
Okay, maybe I should have said I want to make sure that it is technically correct. The levels, that nothing's out of specification.
Well, I think that's also the split between live production, where live production, the people doing the shading in the truck or whatever are responsible direct out to the broadcast pass. So they have to touch it and they have to get it right for what the director wants. In post, it's a different thing. And we would love always as an editor to get flat, uncolored, unmessed with footage so that we can then help do that through the delivery process.
But that's a lot of DPs will try to avoid letting you do that. They want to have the look that they had planned for, and that's a huge thing where they want to burn it in, to make sure that that's what it looks like. And it's harder because these cameras, the digital cameras, their gamut keeps on expanding and everything else. And so it's getting to a point where it doesn't, you're capturing photons, and then how you treat them later is completely different. So it's gonna be interesting. Go ahead, Stuart.
Okay, then I must be the exception that breaks the rule then, because I never want to have it burnt in out on location unless it's 709 going to the web. Never.
The main thing is that it just depends on what people's, especially if you're someone who does shooting and your own post, you have an entirely different view of it, because and I always think it's really important for people to both shoot and post-produce their own work, at least for small projects, so that you get what's happening on the front end of the camera and how it affects your pipeline on the back end, is something that is a big piece of that.
It's remaining the creative intention of the piece you're working on.
Sorry, say it, Kev.
It's remaining it's retaining the creative intention of the director and the artist, that the picture that they're delivering for final output is what they intended, and that should be the rule.
That's their responsibility to do in the coloring suite at the end, after edit's been locked down.
In the modern,
the whole reason we have color.
It's crazy that you can't. The director of photography or the camera operator who's setting this should be able to set that as metadata, save that, get it to the people in post, and then deliver a clean feed that can be applied against.
It is. A lot of this has to do with the fact that people want to say, this is the way I envisioned it, to get back to what Kev's talking about. But it's just a matter of who gets to do, who gets the final say is the real, because as a DP, the problem you get into is your reputation is based on whatever your last film was. So your concern is that if someone messes with your color after you shot it, people say, well, that was a horribly shot film. And you're like, well, that's not what I did. It's what got done to it after I shot it. And that's the hard part. Go ahead, Courtney, and then Sky.
Yeah, DPs used to have a thing called DP lights that Panavision made them, and there were several of them out there that would have an onset monitor in the direction the DP can decide on a look, which was really just a lookup table. And then they would put that onto a floppy disk and send it back to the post house to who was doing transfers or doing the dailies, and they would apply that look, and then so everything would basically have that look. And then when you get into the final final color grading, they would do shot-to-shot matching to that look to obtain an evenness. But yeah, it would start with the DPs and the director's collaboration on what they want the whole thing to look like.
Yep. Sky, and then Stuart.
Courtney, you said floppy disk. Okay. Hey, Doug, I'm curious on the, I know, thumb drive. Anyway, Doug, you're out trying to just capture people running up and down a green field with lots of colors on their jerseys. How much do you care about matching your cameras, or do you just happy that you got a signal?
Oh, no. I am constantly fighting that battle. I mean, and the difficulty with our shows is that we don't have the cameras that you can shade from the truck. So I'm relying on camera operators to know where the white balance is, and to be able to adjust iris and everything. It's a nightmare, because for a 7 o'clock kickoff, you start in bright sunlight with the ND filters full bore, and by the end of the night, it's dark. And there's a period of time where if they're not on, they're grabbing a white balance because it's a nightmare.
What do you?
And you got 5 cameras.
What are you choosing to white balance off of? Just anything white? Just anything? You try to use a centralized thing in the middle of the field?
Well, it's anything white.
Yeah,
It's in the light you're getting the film with.
You find something where all the cameras can go to the same thing. That's there is a white little hut at our football game. Like, hey, go to the hut, punch a white balance, and
for those things that are changing, at least the way we do it is that we set, like, go to this temperature. Like, we won't white balance. Like, we want to go to a certain, because we want them all to be the same. It's, to us, it's more important that they're the same than they are accurate. And so that they so once we get the thing set, once we get the cameras matched, you can change that color, but we would tell everybody to change it at a certain time. Like, we would just go to 49 or go to whatever, everybody go to that number, so that everybody's going to the same number, not trying to do something that I would consider more arbitrary.
Yeah, I wish our cameras could do that.
Yeah, we don't. I will admit, we don't. I haven't shot without a central shading for a decade, so I don't. It's just not something we do very often anymore, because once you're in the Blackmagic universe, it just comes with the camera, so you don't think about it that much. Go ahead, Stuart.
One of the things Bill mentioned before, and I'll come to a point for Sky in a second too, the metadata for cameras is something Blackmagic have got with their Blackmagic RAW. So all of that can be done in post very easily. And if Alex has any sway, we would really love Blackmagic RAW on other cameras. But to Sky, with the white balance and that sort of stuff, like, I'm using IP-based cameras with a web console, and when we're doing motorsport and the camera's a fixed location, and from, say, midday through to 11 p.m. at night with the drag racing, every time I'm coming off of vMix, I'm going across to the laptop, I'm adjusting those cameras continually. Camera control unit guys are amazing to watch, especially if you get to sit in the back of the broadcast truck and watch what they can do just with 2 joysticks that move in 2 directions and rotate and adjust everything. And it is magic what they do.
Yep. Go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, I do sports as well. So what we have is that exchange from daylight to having to look at overhead lighting for the field. And we have totally different setups for each one of the cameras. So you go setup 1, daylight, setup 2, nighttime. And it's just when the camera's not in, we're punching up the new setups.
Right.
And constantly shading the cameras, constantly looking at color. But it's for instance, for an Apple event, there's a lady by the name of Diane who did a lot of the shading. And a lot of you can understand how this would work. That was back in the day when we were projecting on the screen. We didn't have an LED wall to work with. And on one day, she got flesh tones on the screen, flesh tones on a monitor feedback, and the actual shot of the person, they all matched.
Right.
That's really, really hard to do.
Yeah.
And so you look for not only the scope and the equipment, but you look at the person who understands how that whole thing works.
Yep.
And just turn her loose.
Yeah, I will say that I don't know if I could go back to live events without central shading. like I don't think it was one of those things when we did a lot of it without it for a long time. It was 5 or 6 years of us doing that. And it was constantly talking to the camera operators and asking them to do stuff. And then I think the moment we got a couple control units for our EX1s, I think I remember the EX1s were the first ones we got some little paint boxes for, and then we got a couple for our Canons. And then once the Blackmagic stuff came out and we started using it, we just the IV drip was deep, and we just couldn't go back to anything else. Go ahead, Sky.
I think, who is it that would often ask the question, could you explain this as if you were 5? And I don't remember who in our community said that, but I'm wondering if Stuart might do a second half hour or 15-minute version of explaining this, if you, and this not maybe this session right now, but in the future, as if you were 5, what are scopes, what is color, what is RGB, why do I care?
Yeah, we'll do a color correction. We'll do a color matching hour soon. It's a good one.
Well, again, even just to understand the scopes, I get that they're important. I still don't feel like I own them, and I'm embarrassed to say that.
Stuart?
You're 5. What are you doing in the back of the broadcast truck?
They're very good. All right. Hey, I've got a 9 o'clock, so we're gonna roll it up here. So thank you all for coming and having our little discussion. And remember that we've got a great discussion tomorrow. So should be a lot of fun. So we'll see you all tomorrow, bright and early. And have a great day. See you, everybody.